Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're traveling back to the 13th century to unpack what has to be one of the most fascinating intellectual paradoxes of the Middle Ages. Now, our setting for this isn't a physical battlefield, but rather the parchment of medieval manuscripts. We're going to dive into the writings of a highly influential Jewish mystic named Abraham Abulafia and look at exactly how he engaged with the dominant theology of his era to pull off what I can only describe as a brilliant, incredibly complex intellectual heist. So, let's start with the big mystery here. The cross is arguably the most potent, instantly recognizable symbol of Christianity, right? So, why would a medieval Jewish scholar, living in an era of intense, often violent religious division, purposefully write about and even actively utilize his rival's ultimate symbol? Well, as you'll see today, Abulafia didn't just write about the cross, he actually attempted to conceptually steal it. To see how he pulled this off, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the mystery of the cross, move into the covenant of Esau, explore his idea of the complete spiritual covenant, look at how he co-opted Christian imagery, and then wrap it all up with Moses versus the Egyptian.
All right, Section 1, the mystery of the cross.
For Abraham Abulafia, writing wasn't just theology. It was literally the forging of complex weapons in a medieval intellectual war. He constantly uses this Hebrew phrase, sheti erev, which translates to warp and woof, meaning the vertical and horizontal threads used in weaving. Visually, if you lay a vertical thread directly over a horizontal one, you get two intersecting lines. Boom, a geometric cross. And for Abulafia, this weaving metaphor is absolutely profound. To him, it represents the cosmic convergence of dualities, male and female, physical and spiritual, good and evil. So purely as a geometric shape, the cross is the ultimate symbol of two opposing forces meeting in the middle. But he doesn't just stick to geometry. He brings math into the equation, specifically gematria, which is Jewish numerology. Let's de-jargon this really quick. In Hebrew, every single letter has a numerical value. So if two completely different words or phrases add up to the exact same number, Abulafia's mystical framework dictates that they are fundamentally, inexorably connected in the fabric of the universe. This mathematical web is essentially the tool he uses to decode reality, and it's how he launches this whole intellectual heist.
Which brings us to Section 2, the covenant of Esau.
Abulafia takes this geometric cross and his numerology, and he uses them to systematically critique the rival religion of his day. He sets up a very strict binary. In his writings, the name Esau is a well-known code for Christendom. He maps the symbol of the cross directly onto what he calls the covenant of Esau. But here's the catch. According to his analysis, Esau's covenant is completely 100% physical. It's entirely focused on the corporeal bodily world. He contrasts this directly with Jacob's covenant, which represents Judaism, arguing that Jacob's path successfully merges physical action with deep spiritual intellect.
He's essentially arguing that his rivals are totally fixated on a corporeal divinity, and he uses some seriously intense polemical language derived from his math to make this point. He links Esau's cross to the prince of abomination and the foundation of the flesh. He even writes that Esau's figure is hung from the tree of knowledge, which in his framework is a tree associated with physical lust and death, not the tree of life. So for Abulafia, the Christian cross is just a physical intersection. It's completely devoid of the higher spiritual content you'd actually need to reach the divine.
Let's move to Section 3, the complete spiritual covenant.
Okay, here is where this intellectual heist gets absolutely wild. Having argued that his rival's cross is purely physical, Abulafia conceptually steals the geometric symbol back for himself. In one of his surviving manuscripts, sefirotic, there is text explicitly laid out on the page in the shape of a cross, and the text reads, "And Yahweh will reign forever, and he will cut a new covenant for his people." Think about what he's doing here. He's taking the New Testament concept of a new covenant, framing it within the literal geometry of a cross, but writing it in Hebrew to describe an eschatological Jewish covenant. He is physically reappropriating the shape right there on the parchment.
Now, why go through all this trouble? Well, because for Abulafia, the Jewish covenant of circumcision is the true, complete cross. It is sheti erev in its absolute highest form. It unites step 1, the physical act on the flesh, with step 2, the spiritual act. He calls the second step the circumcision of the heart or the tongue, which you achieve through intense mystical knowledge of the divine name. By uniting the physical and the spiritual, he argues that he has constructed the true cross, while his rivals are left holding only the physical half.
Section 4. Co-opting Christian imagery.
Now that we've got the theological math down, let's look at how this turns into a highly visible visual heist. In the biblical book of Ezekiel,
The prophet describes this intense vision of 4 living creatures, called the Hayot. Each one has 4 faces: a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. Abulafia mathematically maps these 4 creatures directly onto the 4 endpoints of his geometric cross. But here's the crazy part. Christian tradition had already been using these exact same 4 faces for centuries to represent the 4 gospel evangelists: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they heavily featured them at the 4 endpoints of the Christian cross in medieval art. Abulafia is deliberately taking a ubiquitous, totally recognizable Christian visual motif and claiming, nope, this is actually the secret structure of Jewish mysticism.
And get this, we actually have historical proof that this cross-pollination of symbols was really happening in practice. In 1348, which is just a generation after Abulafia, a workshop down in Barcelona produced a Hebrew manuscript of Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed. To illustrate Ezekiel's chariot, the artist used the exact visual layout of the Christian evangelists. So this blending, sharing, and outright stealing of religious symbols, it was a real, tangible thing happening right in Abulafia's cultural backyard.
Finally, Section 5, Moses versus the Egyptian.
We have officially reached the climax of Abulafia's writing, where he pulls all of his mathematical codes together into one final showdown. He sets up this massive dichotomy between Moses and a figure he calls the Egyptian, which his text strongly implies a stand-in for Jesus. The Egyptian is inextricably tied to the physical tree of knowledge, pure flesh, and material corruption. Moses, on the other hand, is tied to the tree of life, the spirit, and the intellect. It is the ultimate contrast, the incomplete physical covenant on the left and the complete spiritual one on the right.
Now here is the absolute kicker: how he connects them with the math. Using gematria, Abulafia calculates the numerical value of the name Moses. It equals exactly 345. The Egyptian also equals exactly 345. But he goes even further. He takes the phrase for a fusion of semen, basically representing the biological earthly origin of all humans, and that calculates to exactly 999. Then, he shows that a fully spelled out divine name associated with Moses also equals exactly 999. He is mathematically proving that both figures stem from the exact same human earthly origin. But through the intellect and the complete spiritual covenant, Moses ascends to the divine, while the Egyptian remains trapped in the flesh.
Abulafia spent a staggering amount of intellectual energy decoding, deconstructing, and ultimately trying to steal the cross. But looking back at it all, it leaves us with this incredibly fascinating psychological question. Does obsessively reclaiming a rival's symbol actually defeat them, or does it secretly honor the power of that symbol? It really makes you wonder about the hidden, complex psychological psychology behind medieval religious rivalries, where the line between absolute rejection and intense fascination was, frankly, remarkably thin. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this sparked your curiosity to look even deeper into the history of these incredible texts.